we are transitioning straight into the next program on our schedule today. The next program is a panel discussion called Baskets of the World, and it's a discussion with three organizations who partner with basket weavers in Guatemala, Namibia, and Panama. And I would like to share that this program is dedicated to longtime WARP member Jackie Abrams, who passed away in 2021 after a lifetime of work as a basketry artist, teacher, and community consultant. Jackie was a beloved member of the WARP community for nearly 20 years. She influenced the way WARP understands not just weaving, but all textile traditions, by helping everyone to see that basketry is integral to textile communities worldwide. Through her thoughtful work as a basketry artist and her advocacy work in basketry communities around the world, Jackie deeply influenced the WARP community, and we established the WARP Community Leadership Award in 2022 to honor Jackie. And you can see there's a whole page dedicated to Jackie and her story on the WARP website. So the Baskets of the World panel is moderated by WARP board member Cale Chappell, who joined WARP because of Jackie's influence. 17 years before weaving his first basket, Cale founded Baskets of Africa, a fair trade company committed to economic empowerment for basket weavers from over 20 countries. Traveling across Africa to meet weavers, Cale discovered that basketry is as diverse as it is universal. So thank you, Cale, for hosting and moderating today's panel on Baskets of the World, and I will turn it over to you to introduce our panelists.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. Thank you to WARP for hosting this panel on basketry. And also thank you to Jackie Abrams for getting me involved with WARP. It's a great group of like-minded people supporting, weaving artists around the world. We're going to jump right into this because we have three amazing groups to cover here and only an hour. So if you can put your questions in the chat as we go, at the end, we'll answer questions for all three groups just to make sure everybody has time to get through their presentations. We're going to start in Africa. Joining us from Namibia, Karin LaRue, who's been living in rural communities in Namibia for over 30 years, is the founding director of OMBA Arts Trust, a Namibian not-for-profit social enterprise that supports the sustainable livelihoods of hundreds of artisans and artists. OMBA works with over 150 basket weavers in 7 regions of Namibia, including the San Kwe people inside the Bwabwata National Park. The baskets are all distinct and different in style, but they're all made from the fronds of the local Makalani palm trees. Go ahead, Karin.
Thank you very much, Cale, and thank you, Kelsey, as well, and hello to everybody. Yes, I'm calling from Namibia with my husband as my IT guy here. It's 9 o'clock at night and it's winter, so we're really in a totally different time zone to yours, but thank you very, very much. Thank you for that introduction. I'm just going to see if we can get onto my PowerPoint. So there we are. So as Cale mentioned, I'm the founding director of OMBA. I am a Namibian, and I'm going to share with you a 30-year journey together with basket weavers in Namibia. I'm going to, as Cale told you, we are a non-profit and we're a member of the World Fair Trade Organization. So our work is very much steeped in supporting livelihoods. But of course, with that comes all the excitement and passion of working with wonderfully creative artisans. We don't just do baskets, we do many other products as well. So I'm going to, where do I change to the next page? No, sorry, everybody, we'll get there. Yeah, there we are. So just for those of you, I want to just share with you where Namibia is. So we just northwest of South Africa, Botswana to our east, Angola to the north. And we're a very large country with the size of Germany and France, but with a very small population of about 2.3 million people. And the basket weaving takes place mostly in the northern regions of Namibia, from the Zambezi Strip, which you'll see going into Zambia, across south of Angola. That's where all the basket weaving takes place. And I'm based in Windhoek. And just to give you an idea, the closest weavers are about 600 miles away from us, and the furthest are about 800 miles. So we work, we've been working for 30 years, so we have established really good relationships and systems that work. But we're not based in the field. We are based in the capital. So just to share with you where it all began, before independence in Namibia in the 1990s, the northern regions were largely inaccessible because we had a military conflict over about a 25-year-old period. So of course, anthropologists and local communities knew about the basket weaving, but here in Windhoek, you saw very little. Obviously the museums had things, but nothing for sale, and tourism was also very undeveloped in those years. And in 1991 was the year of the baskets, and I got involved with doing some research and contacting basket making communities. But it really took a turn in 1992 when the local headman asked the nonprofit that I was working with at the time to support the women in the area. And so I knew that there were baskets, and then went off and did some more interviews, and saw that women were making baskets, and so began our journey. And it started with obviously upgrading workshops. We had no intention of marketing at that time, but over time, clearly the women needed a market, and so we started the marketing arm of our business. And we started in that particular region, we started with 15 weavers, and today we support over 150 in that region. And then over the years, we've worked in 2 other regions, and we now work with probably over 260 weavers. As Carol said, in total, probably about 460, 70 artisans. And we market and exhibit locally and internationally. So I'm going to share with you 3 styles of baskets that there are others, but I thought these would be of interest to you. The first are baskets from an agricultural tradition. That's the photograph at the top center. Those are baskets obviously used for harvesting and winnowing and mixing grain. And then the others to the right, those are the ones that Carl described, very interesting. They're from a hunting gathering tradition made by San, who are the indigenous people of Southern Africa. And then baskets from a beer making tradition where there is more innovation. So we'll start with the baskets from the agricultural tradition. The basket on the top left is a very typical traditional basket, large, and it uses the coil technique. And well done, Cal, you got the pronunciation of Makalani. It's the Hyphene pitasiana is the botanical name, and it grows actually it's a belt that grows from Botswana through the northern regions up into Angola. And if you look at the top center photograph, that is the adult palm tree in the background. And there's a woman who's just been harvesting the young leaves carrying it on her head. And to the left of the photograph, you will see the young palm trees, and that's the leaf that they harvest, the sort of supple young leaves. So because we've gone into a slightly more commercial production, increased production, we've been very insistent that we make sure that the resource is sustainable. So for the last 25 years, we've been working with homestead gardens, community gardens, where women grow palm trials, sometimes successful, sometimes not. So the photograph to your third from the left, that is an example of one of the homestead gardens with some dye trees in the back. That's a Burkemia discolor. They use the the bark from that tree to get a brown color. And then the photograph to the right is also natural dyes. Photograph to the bottom right, also Bohemia discolor. That's also a homestead garden. And then they, pound the leaves or the bark. We probably work now with about eight different dyes, natural dyes. Pound the dyes, the bark, the leaves, roots, and so on. And then to the bottom left, you'll see some of the color palette that we get from the palm. And then we started with workshops, and these are to the top left is a group arriving for a workshop with their materials, and the workshop in the middle. And then this basket to the right, it was a basket I actually bought in 1991. And over the years, we've progressed to these beautiful baskets to the bottom right, natural colors, the middle one, and then to the left. So we've never mass produced. We've never introduced templates. The women, we try and encourage the women to use their own designs, but obviously every now and again we give a bit of direction. The black and white was some direction that we gave. And then also over time, these beautiful asymmetrical baskets to the bottom left have evolved. So the baskets have become truly, the creative expression of all these weavers. And that gives you an idea of the palette and the quality and the designs that have evolved over the years. I'm then going to take you to these traditional sand gathering baskets. They're queer. Very interesting. They were discovered, they died out the technique, and a friend and colleague found one in a homestead about 20 years ago, and it was kind of restarted again, and now we work with about 40, 45, 50 weavers. Interesting, it's a warp weft technique, also using natural dyes, very, very poor community, so obviously the income is really important. And they were used traditionally for gathering a wild fruit. So this is a very, very unique basket. I think, as far as I know, the only sand baskets from Southern Africa. And then the last range of baskets I'm showing you is rooted in a beer making tradition. So beer making is all over Africa, local cultures make beer. And when I started doing the research in the early 90s, I came across these funnels or these sieves where communities would, sieve or strain the beer. And it was a very interesting technique. They basically roll the palm and then twist it and then sew it. Well, I'll show you in the next slide. But they don't make them anymore. So I love the technique and the texture. So we revived that and then created these contemporary baskets. We call them soft baskets or string baskets. So to your left, you will see them threading the twisted palm, and there they are making them. And they've kind of evolved. Here's another one with a textured tufted palette, and here's a shorter one or texture. So very, very unique, very different, and also there are only about 25 women who make them. And I think I'm going to end now. I think we're very close to my time. I hope I've done better than the trial that we did last week. So I just want to thank Warp again for inviting me to share our story. For those of you who are interested in seeing us or meeting us or purchasing our baskets, we will be at the Santa Fe International Folk Art Market. There will be a Namibia booth, so we will have the baskets there as well as some of our other products. You can also go online on our OMBA website, and there's also contact to our marketing person. So if you want to contact us there, Facebook will tell you about our organization and how we work. And also then there was an article in the Salvage magazine, online magazine, that also tells you a little bit about the story. So I think that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much again. If there are any questions, please feel free.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, please put any questions into the chat. And your timing was perfect there, Karin. Okay. We're going to, so we'll take questions at the very end for everybody. And again, thank you so much for joining us from Namibia. And if you're going to the International Folk Art Market in Santa Fe, you meet Karin there in person. So I really encourage you to do that and support them through their website as well. Next, we're going to go to the other side of the world, to Panama. And Rainforest Baskets has been collecting and importing art from the Wunan weavers since 2002. Rainforest Baskets is the small team of Jennifer and Ed Kuiper, and also their invaluable Panama half, Sebedeo Peraza, a member of the Wunan community. Rainforest Baskets was launched in 2002 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and is now located in Portland, Oregon. Their goals evolved over time, but the overlying focus is to support the perception of Wunan artist basketry as a fine art, while helping collectors learn about the people and the basket making process. And Jennifer, I think we have Karin spotlighted or something here.
Let's see, I think I've undone Karin's spotlight. Maybe Jen needs to unmute herself.
Okay. Well, I just unmuted myself. I'm going to try and do my share screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay. Is the presentation up?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much to share the information about Wunan Rainforest Baskets. The Wunan weavers we work with are from Panama, specifically the eastern section of Panama called the Darien Rainforest, which is why they're called Rainforest Baskets. The Wunan are a small tribe. They number approximately 15,000, and we work with maybe 50 to 75 weavers. Most of the weavers are in small family-based villages scattered in the Darien, with some having moved to the outskirts of Panama City to be closer to more resources, most importantly, state-sponsored education. The baskets were originally utilitarian with very little decoration. They were used to contain household items and even to cook with using a steam method. In the 70s, a Mennonite missionary family traveled to meet with the weavers, both with religious purposes and with the intent of recording the language of the Wunan Wonmiu. They encouraged the weavers to incorporate decorations and sell their baskets for income. And from that initial push, an entire art form developed, getting more intricate works year over year. Baskets today have come very far from the first decorative pieces 45 years ago. They're extremely intricate, taking months and often several years to create each one. They're woven either in a traditional geometric or a nature-inspired pictorial design. Geometric motifs, as you see here, draw their inspiration from multiple sources, including pre-Columbian textiles, ceramics, and rock art. Baskets woven with these designs are often referred to as cultural due to the fact that a large part of their inspiration stems from body paintings and patterns on spiritual paraphernalia used by village shamans. These are examples of some of the finest pictorial designs. So pictorial motifs, on the other hand, are inspired by their natural surroundings. In fact, these designs often include local flowers, trees, birds, ocelots, jaguars, iguanas, and other flora and fauna native to the Darien rainforest. Pictorial designs come in a variety of styles, some perfect renditions of the floral subject matter the weaver is conveying, and some an interpretation of the flora using angular shapes and a shaded background. Palm fronds from the very top of this spiny chunga palm tree are the basic sources of weaving materials. Spines on this tree can grow as long as 6 inches. The palm leaves are gathered by laying a ladder of a homemade ladder across the side of the tree, climbing to the top and gathering the green, new, softest palm fronds. These are then peeled apart by hand, as seen pictured, and then shredded into pieces as thin as a thread. The weavers shred materials using their nails, slicing each thin one with one hand while keeping the bundle of palms in place using either their feet or tucked under arms. Once the bundle is shredded and laid out to bleach and dry in the sun, the palm pieces are stained using vegetal dyes. Bundles of palm are kept braided loosely together so they don't get tangled and to allow artists to pull out a single strand as needed. The majority of dyes used are vegetal, with some weavers experimenting in aniline colors. You can always tell the aniline colors because they have a different internal brightness, like the green braid pictured here. Dyes are created using gathered roots, berries, and other natural resources found in the Darien rainforest, and some of these resources are pictured here. On the top left, liana's vine is a woody climbing plant that hangs from trees, especially in tropical rainforests. It is used to make both a pink color and a cream color, depending on which part of the vine is used. The top right is cocobola wood. It is a prized rosewood used for decorative carvings, knife handles, and more. Many carvers leave behind wood shavings that are used as a chocolate colored dye. On the bottom left, you could see saffron, which is saffron. Saffron makes many colors, including a rich green color, and it's also used to make green is solimon, a seed-like potato, and earth. And the bottom right is a trumpet vine. Flowers are used to create brilliant colors depending on the time in bloom. Vibrant red and colorful hues, or rich, darker hues, depending on the life cycle of the plant. So it's not just picked at one point when it has one color. We started representing the Wonan basketry in 2011 after working with the previous owners who were retiring. Ed and I have worked with the same Panama-based partner since 2011, Sebedeo Piraza. He is a member of the Wonan tribe also. He is our primary contact with the weavers for cultivating new weavers, managing payments, and shipping. We normally take about 2 trips a year to meet with the weavers, get updates on long-term pieces, and maintain our relationship with the tribe. While Ed visits, he will stay in the village for a short time to continue our connection with the work and our commitment to representing their art. He will make notes on larger multi-year pieces under construction, photograph them, and often give out deposits on longer-term pieces to support the weavers as they spend multiple years working on a single piece. Here are some of the longer-term pieces that were captured on Ed's travels. These show under construction pieces that were being worked on during those visits, and it's not uncommon to see the same basket over several years of visits. And we just photograph them as they grow. Some of our collectors even follow a basket for years as they're being created, if they want to be offered a first chance at it when it's done. So it's a very unique, personal, individual craft. Weavers typically work on a single piece while their children are at school, which runs about 6 to 8 hours a day. Panama requires free education for children for up to 6th grade. And after that, the weavers will need to relocate their families closer to the city to get more free education. This is why several families have moved from the villages and have created a new village on the outskirts of Panama City, easy to reach by car. They will each work on a single piece, not sharing construction of a single piece at all, but they will weave in groups, babies afoot, gossiping and chattering while they weave. It's similar to a quilting bee. Baskets under construction are wrapped in a white pillowcase or sheet for protection. Here you also see a weaver shredding palm fronds, one piece held between her toes for stability. Our work as collectors and marketers has a profound impact on the entire Wonan community. I don't think it's possible to engage in commerce with an indigenous community without leaving lasting changes. For starters, the entire development of the basket weaving from a private utilitarian task to a commercial decorative art form has intrinsically changed how the artists themselves view basketry. They are no longer casual objects for containing items, but a source of income, skill, and price. This change was brought originally through the two missionaries living in Southern California now, who changed the course of the Wonan forever through introducing a livelihood. With their ingenuity, they also introduced the Mennonite religion that has had incredible impacts on the community, shifting the outlook from shaman practices to a Christian faith-based practices and loosening the tribe's ties to their traditional version of an earth-based beginning creator. So the original influence brought both opportunity to sustain their indigenous lifestyle to create income and also a deviation from their longstanding beliefs. We have helped to change the way these women think by offering them the status of master weavers with world-class talents, as opposed to low-income earners supporting Panama's tourist souvenir market. By engaging in a long-term relationship with master weavers of the craft, we help to alleviate poverty in the region, not only at the individual and family level. Master weavers earn 3- and 4-figure prices for their hard work and dedication, but also at the community level. Through the success of their craft, these weavers have been able to raise their families out of poverty and help support their community. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you about the Wonan, their art, and our relationship with them. If you want to know more, we have a lot of information, including weaver interviews, travel stories, and lots of photos on our website of pieces that have come up under construction. You can look at rainforestbaskets.com or contact us anyway through rainforestbaskets.com.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Wonderful presentation. And again, everybody, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. We'll have plenty of time at the end for lots of questions. Next, we're going to move to Guatemala, and we have co-presenters. And we'll spotlight Ann Kelly, I think, first. As executive director of Mayan Hands for the last 10 years, Ann Kelly has had the enormous privilege to partner with talented Mayan women artists in Guatemala. They have welcomed her into their creative process as they design pine needle and wild grass baskets destined for an international market. Co-presenter Michelle Hammond wove her first basket from the hanging branches of the willow trees growing along the banks of the Charles River in Boston. Over the decades since, as her vision has changed and expanded, she has continued to explore functional and non-functional basketry. She's had the amazing opportunity to teach pine needle basketry to Mayan women artisans in Guatemala through Maya traditions and through Mayan Hands. Michelle's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally and has been included in the books 500 Baskets, Fiber Arts Design Book 2, and in several other publications.
So am I sharing my screen?
You are.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect.
Look right? All right, okay. So thank you so much to WARP for inviting us to participate in this panel in Jackie's honor. We're so grateful to the WARP community, which has supported Mayan Hands in so many ways over the years. I will tell you a little bit about Mayan Hands in general, and then Michelle will talk about how this project started and how it took hold. And afterwards, time permitting, I'll tell you a little bit more about where we are now. So Mayan Hands is a fair trade nonprofit that has been partnering with Mayan women artisans in the Guatemalan highlands for more than 30 years. And we now work with 17 democratically organized cooperatives, well more than 200 women in all. And our goal is to provide opportunities, both economic and educational, to Mayan women and girls, because we know that when women are able to earn income, they can count on the ripple effect for their families and their communities is profound. So we started working with weavers, and selling to an international market opens up important income generating opportunity. However, competition, particularly in textiles, is fierce. And we have been working with several weaving groups for whom we have not been able to provide sufficient orders. This is still the case now. And because we have a long-term commitment to working with the cooperatives, to the women in the cooperatives, we needed to explore other possibilities. And the women who participated in this project were textile artisans. They are still weavers and embroiderers. And most importantly, they were open to learning new techniques with new materials. So although there is a tradition of pine needle and wild grass basketry in Guatemala, the baskets we make are quite different from those, and we both wholesale and retail these. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who will tell you more about how this took root. And there's Michelle.
Great, great, thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Warp, for the opportunity to talk about my experiences teaching the Mayan artisans in the highlands of Guatemala. Let's see, Anne, can I?
So do you want me to
You have
advance?
to do the slide, Anne? Or-
Okay, yeah.
In 2004, I saw a notice in the newsletter of my basketry guild, the Bay Area basket makers. I live in near San Francisco, and it was a notice for looking for people to teach basketry in Guatemala. And the purpose was to share and teach the Mayan artisans. There were about 15 co-ops and I believe 300 women to teach them some new techniques and some new ideas of things to make. The market was pretty saturated at that time with woven articles. So as I said, they were seeking something new. And the organization that posted this was called Oshalach Hubats, and it was a nonprofit special project that had been put together by Jane Mintz on the left. She was the founder of Maya Traditions, excuse me, and Brenda Rosenbaum on the right, who founded Mayan Hands. And Oshalach Hubats means 13 threads. It is named after a sacred day on the Mayan calendar. And next slide, please. So I have been making and teaching basketry since the early 80s. And at that time, I was working a lot with pine needles. I live in Northern California, as I mentioned, and had access to longleaf pines. And I thought that perhaps this might be something that would work for Oshalach Hubats. So I contacted them, and in 2005, I took the first of my 4 trips to Guatemala to teach pine needle basketry. Next slide, please. My first concern was the availability of pine needles. I knew that they did grow in Guatemala, but I didn't know where they would be, if there would be access to them. So I brought with me pine needles from where I live, and I also brought raffia, which is, you see on the right, that's used to coil the baskets. And next slide, please. And in fact, there are longleaf pine trees in Guatemala. The one on the left is, I believe it's either Guatemala or Montezuma pine. The needles can grow as long as 16 inches. The material that you see on the right is called pajon, and it is a wild grass that grows in Guatemala. And in fact, people had been making simple baskets with using pajon. Next, please. So my first thoughts about teaching were what would be the most effective way to do this. As I knew that some of the women did not read or write, demonstrating was the best way to go in this case. Excuse me. So here you can see me showing how to start a basket, and in the background are some samples and ideas of stitches and techniques and shapes that I brought with me on that first trip. I also prepared handouts and with illustrated instructions about techniques and stitching and shaping. The woman on the left is working on, and these are very early baskets, working on shaping and stitching. The person on the right, the woman on the right, is working on also learning new stitches, the thickness of the coils for the pine needles. Next, please. And at the end of each workshop, which would either be a day or a couple of days, we would gather together and look at what we had worked on at that time, and talk about what had worked well and what could possibly be improved. Next. Another issue or concern was the language. I don't speak very much Spanish, so there would always be an interpreter who would come with us and go from English to Spanish to Kachikal or Quiche, and then back again. And this is Deborah Chandler, 2009, talking about one of the baskets we were working on. Next. The first village I went to was called El Arilanto. And these women had had some experience with baskets. They had woven the simple pajon baskets that I showed you the graphs of that earlier. And so they caught on quickly to learning the new techniques and the new stitches and working with the new material. Next. This village is called Santa Clara, and primarily they had done in the past crochet and embroidery. So basketry was new to them and a little more challenging because it was such a new thing. Interestingly, that particular village, when it was called the basket making village, there was a big banner when you came into the village because the men had been weaving baskets there for a long time. They were functional utilitarian market baskets, but completely different from what we were doing. Next. I have returned 3 times to work with the various groups, the last time being 2017. And when I would go there, we would follow up on new designs. I would show some new stitching or techniques. I would often bring books with me, often books of collections from international baskets and things that women might not have been exposed to. And I also brought some of my own baskets from my personal collection. Next. This is from 2017. This is the village of El Triunfo. And I was here working on, again, stitching and spacing of the stitches and coming up with some new ideas. And next. And finally, my goal in going to teach there had been to teach techniques, stitching, preparation, gathering of material, just the basic skills that were needed to work with pine needles and create baskets. And my hope had always been that the women and the artisan groups would incorporate their own personal aesthetic. And as you can see, the love of color and pattern has yielded some wonderful baskets. So I will turn this back to you, Anne. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. it's always so incredible for me knowing where we are now to look back on where we've been. So from the first initial 3 cooperatives, we now work with 7 cooperatives of basket weavers who can have each cooperative can have as much work as they want. And what's exciting is that several of the women are teaching now. They're either teaching new members in their group, or they're, as we expand, they're teaching new cooperatives. So Cecilia in this photo is not one of the original basket makers. She learned basketry somewhere else and then had to learn more about quality control, and she has just become such a wonderful basket maker, and her stitches are so beautiful that she works with other artisans who need support around stitching. And one of the reasons the baskets are so successful in the market is that they're really unique. There's really not anything quite like them. So each month, how we do this is each month we're doing more production work. So we have several different styles of baskets. And each month I send an order to Guatemala. Before that, I check in with the groups to make sure I understand their capacity and make adjustments if needed. And then when the women drop off their previous order, and that's what's happening right here in this photo, our 2 field workers are going on the left and center, are examining the baskets for quality control. When the baskets are dropped off, they pick up the next order. We provide the raw materials, in this case, raffia, and the women procure the pine needles and the bajon themselves. And then as each basket passes quality control, it's tagged with the artisan's name. And during the past 2 years, we haven't been able to keep up with the demand for baskets, but finally we have enough inventory. So it's about time that once again, we'll have one of our basket competitions, which is basically a call for new designs. And each woman is paid for her entry into the competition. And if her design goes into production, she receives a premium. So these women, both of these baskets went into production, and the artisans received a premium for that. And usually we name the basket after the woman who came up with the original design. So Zoila here in this photo is holding her Zoila basket. So often when we receive a basket, sometimes Michelle and I will talk to each other, and sometimes we need to tweak the designs a little bit, like maybe suggest moving stitches around, or maybe usually it's reducing color. Sometimes they have an awful lot of color and it doesn't always work. So given the popularity of the basket line, we created a collection of textiles, our Madre Tierra collection, to coordinate with the baskets, so that this project now benefits another group of artisans, weavers as well. So here are some of these designs, and you can see them with some of the textiles. And if you want to learn more about this, you can look at our blog. There's lots of information, www.mayanhands.org, or you can contact us at, I'll see this email, info@mayanhands.org. So that's it. Anything else, Michelle, that we were going to mention?
I think we've covered it, Anne.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both for the presentation.
Okay, now I need to unscreen share. Okay,
Yeah.
Stop share. All right, get out.
All right. Just a reminder to all the participants, if you can put your questions in the chat, we'll start going through those questions. The first one here for Karin, what is used to get the dark orange color dye? What dye is used for the dark orange color on the baskets in Namibia?
Sure. Now, Hoppersnadet Nat, I hope I could pronounce it. I think it's called Okonyoto. I don't know what the botanical name is, but it's I think it's the little bush that you saw in the presentation that they use the leaves. But they mix them, and they also, some colors are more intense than others depending on how much dye they put in. But I think it is the Oconyoto dye.
Interesting. I'm really interested in that lavender color as well. What do they use for the lavender color?
That's a very interesting one, Cal. It's actually it's almost like a fungus that grows on the mahango. And they take that off on the pearl millet, and that creates that lovely lavender color. So that's quite an unusual one.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We had another question about is there a way that each of you, we'll just start with Karin since she's here on the screen, but a way that each of you determine like the pricing that goes to the artisan or the artisans, how the prices are kind of set as far as what they get?
It depends on whether you're doing retail and wholesale export. So there are different margins clearly for, to cover costs, also for the transport and the people who do the buying. And they're also graded. We grade, exceptional A, Bs and Cs. But typically it's about 50 to 65%. And then the really good baskets, for example, at Folk Art Market, if we sell those beyond our normal markup, the women will get a bonus from the really good baskets.
Jennifer, thank you, Karin. Jennifer?
Yes. So how do we price our baskets?
And how you kind of determine what the artisans get or.
So our artisans price their baskets, and they know fair market value. So they know the difference between what they're going to get if they take it to Panama City and try and set up a stall, and how much. So, and they know, and we can tell by the quality, as we take photographs. So I mean, they know their market value. So it's really them setting the pricing, and then we are the main purchasers of the high-end pieces. So I think they pretty much know that when they produce multiple year pieces, we've already kind of discussed what a idea for an ending price may be, because they've received deposits along the years so that they can stay working. So it's up to them, but they know their market value based on past purchases and based on, what their time spent on it and their skill level. Obviously, some are better and some are worse, but.
While we have you here, what also about how long in years or so did it take to kind of migrate from the more basic motifs to the elaborate ones that we see today?
I think it took about 20 years. So from the mid 70s to maybe the mid 90s. So there even in the 2010s, there's way more elaborate pieces than were being created 15 years prior to that. So here, this is a 1993 piece. Can you see this a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Now there could have been more elaborate ones being made at the time. These are smaller ones, obviously. This was about 2 or 3 years ago.
Wow.
So this one has like this very subtle light blue clouds on top of the small basket, all of these unique detailed birds. So I think in 20 years, they started with some maybe basic geometric designs. And initially they would put a design here and a design here. So it wasn't until maybe even 10 years after they started decorating them that they started wrapping the whole thing in the decorative piece instead of just like a thing here and a thing here.
I've also been very curious for years. I've read the books and looked online, and I'm amazed by these baskets. How are they related, the Panama baskets, related to the ones that come from Colombia, which seem to be all just the geometric designs, more like the sort of older Panamanian? Is there any relation between the people or the production of those baskets?
Yes, They're both wonan. So there's the Colombian wonan and Panamanian wonan. We primarily work with the Panamanian wonan, although I'm starting to have conversation with the Colombian wonan. The Panamanian wonan, there's a couple of motif differences. Panamanian wonan do not weave figures of people. So it's very unusual to see, I mean, I've seen one or two, but it's very unusual to see a figure of a person. Or I had a basket once that had a couple of people with a little village hut in it, and that was highly unusual. You'll see that more likely in the Colombian wonan. The Panamanian wonan they use much tinier coils. So the stitching is very much like needlepoint. And the Colombian wonan is also, but the Panamanian wonan, they have smaller coils and smaller stitches. The Colombian wonan, their stitches are kind of elongated. So you'll see, a stitch this long, as in with the finest Panamanian ones, it's not even 1/4 of an inch for a stitch that covers a coil. So they're similar, they just have a different time structure. So if your coil is, 1/4 of an inch around, you're going to have to do many more stitches for a much longer time to actually cover that. If your coil is, I don't know, 1/2 inch wide, those are exaggerated numbers, but you're going to have fewer stitches and they're going to be longer to cover the entire length of the coil. They both have very beautiful outcomes. There's just a different amount of tiny detail stitching in the Panamanian wonan.
Interesting, very interesting. If we can move over to Anne with the question sort of about pricing. And then I have another question for you as well that came in.
Okay. So the women decide on the prices. So when we develop a product, we have a profile for that product and we capture all the costs, and the women tell us what they want to earn. And generally we do that. And we have also done some time studies to make sure that they're earning the equivalent of a minimum wage. And sometimes they come back to us and say, this basket takes longer than, in fact, when I was just in Guatemala recently, they pointed out that there's one basket that has a double stitch, so it takes longer to make, and they should be receiving more for that. So we'll be, in the next couple of weeks, we're going through and adjusting all of the prices of our baskets because the cost of living has gone up so much that the women need to earn more money.
Interesting. Roughly how long does it take them to weave a basket? I mean, I know it depends on the size and the pattern and everything, but how does that vary?
It varies a lot. And it's been difficult to capture that at times, because we'll say, how long does it take to make this basket? And they'll say, oh, a day. But then when you sit next to them, you realize it doesn't take a day. So the small baskets, the tiny baskets, I'd say an hour and a half, up to much more complicated ones take several days to make. And they're all priced accordingly. And we also factor in the cost of gathering the raw materials. And what's interesting is that up until very recently, the women were gathering the materials themselves, or their family members were gathering the materials. But when I was just there recently, I learned that every single group now is purchasing them. So they earn more money making baskets than gathering raw materials. So we're going to be looking at our product profiles and factoring that into the cost as well.
And have you, another question came in here, have you encountered any challenges with shipping or customs, given that the materials used are plants? This will be for all three of you, but we'll start with Anne here.
Not the kind of problems that you have, Cal, but you have a good story. But we have certificates of origin for all the materials that are used in the basket, so we have no problems at all.
Yeah, I have 31 years of crazy stories of importing.
I'm thinking of the basketry story.
We won't get into that. And I will say there are challenges shipping to Australia and New Zealand, for example. They have very restrictive import laws there. Karen.
No, I think we also, as you say, Australia, New Zealand, there are. But generally, I mean, we ship to Europe and America, and generally we don't have problems. Sometimes we shipping in mass, we need to fumigate, but by and large, we haven't had any problems.
Another question for you, Karin. Palm leaf, which the baskets are coiled palm leaf over grasses. The palm leaf seems to be very sort of waxy and water resistant. So how do they get the dyes to stick in that palm leaf, if you will, or how do they get the dyes to work on the palm leaves?
Well, it's quite interesting. So everybody uses the Makalani palm, but they process it differently. The one lot that I showed you, they work with water. They obviously put the palm in the water, and if they dye it, I think the heat takes away that surface treatment. Whereas in another region, they actually boil the palm before they process it, so the basket is a lot paler. But generally, they boil the palm with the young fronds, so it's not a problem.
So the heat allows it to penetrate.
Yeah,
sort of that,
penetrate.
it's almost like a waxy surface or something. I feel on the palm leaves sometimes.
Yes.
I'm also being told that although we're a few minutes to the hour, we actually have a little bit of extra time, so we can keep going here. Where were we? Oh, Jennifer. Any challenges with shipping the natural fiber materials?
No, we've had no problems. I think the most exciting thing I've ever had happen was a bug flew out of one after I received a shipment, but shipping anywhere else, that's never been an issue so far.
I will say just one quick little story that if you have, well, even say bananas coming in from Central America to the US, and customs could open the container to inspect it. It could be completely full of tarantulas and spiders, and they just close it up and pass it because those are beneficial insects. They're not restricted anyway. They're not harmful to our agriculture here. So, oh yeah, bring them on in. So there's all these crazy little laws and rules, literally thousands and thousands of pages that we have to follow when we're doing these things. But yeah, you follow the rules and everything goes pretty smoothly usually. Jennifer, how do they plan their designs? Do they use pictures? Do they as inspiration or to follow, or do they draw? Or how do they plan those designs and actually get them to match up when they come to the other side of the baskets?
This is a question I get all the time. It's a good question because the motifs completely surround the piece, and you know, with a skilled weaver, really with any weaver who could make something of this size, you're not going to find a half a bird somewhere, right? You're just, we've asked the weavers this many times, and they just say this. So by the time they get to be a good enough weaver that they can, I don't know, here are just some examples. So maybe this is just an example of repeating a design. How many times can I repeat this and keep it from not getting smushed? And then maybe they'd move on. This is kind of intricate, but maybe they'd move on to fish and see if they could make fish, you know, in a small piece, and really creating it from the bottom to top. So the weavers that can apply the motifs to some kind of basket they just know it's in their heads, and they all say it's in their heads how they're going to create. They can't count stitching because you can never really compensate for the human effect of it being a little wider than you thought or a little smaller than you thought, right? The stitching's always going to be a little different. It's not mathematical. So they always say this. It's always, and they practice on little teeny ones, and then maybe a little bit bigger, and then they get a little more intricate, and then they get 3 feet wide sometimes. So they just say they know.
Amazing. And if they are doing, say, a parrot or well, that would be an easy reference, but maybe the fish, because the fish are underwater usually. But do they do the whole thing from memory, or do they sometimes have a reference photo to remember, kind of the shape of the fish or that sort of thing?
They do those things from memory. I have seen a couple things. So they're really self-propelled, and they're kind of ingenious on their self-motivation and their competition that's made it finer and better and finer and better. It wasn't an outside influence that made it finer and better. It was their own internal sense of competition with each other that made it tighter and smaller and tighter and smaller. So as they practice with smaller pieces, because the materials are precious, as are right for everybody, the materials are costly and timely to dye. They just practice with smaller pieces to try and get it right before they put it on a larger piece.
Wonderful. Well, and as I mentioned, I've heard in Karin and I have a mutual friend who's unfortunately passed away, but Sheila from Swaziland. And she told me one time, some weavers are born with the ability to weave those incredibly complicated patterns and coil weaving all the way around and have everything match and everything come out perfect. And then she told me some other weavers are born with the ability to do miniature. So the fact that the weavers there in Panama are doing both is extra special, I think.
But some weavers have specialties. Some specialize. There's a family of 3 sisters who specialize in butterflies, macaws, and parrots. And they only do those 3 things. And then there's a weaver that specializes his own. She does mostly a feather motif. And there's some weavers that really do just black and white geometrics. You sometimes, but you don't often find weavers that'll go across the gamut for all of them. They have their own individual precision with their own individual specialty.
Interesting. Okay. Well, and I will mention again, we're past the hour, but we're going to go a few minutes longer if that's okay with you all. Because
may I ask a question?
Yes.
I ask a question? I'm just curious. Are the women? I mean, have they gone through school, or are they? Because I know in the case of our weavers, most of them have not been to school, and so I'm always amazed at the sophistication of the designs and the symmetry or asymmetry. So I'm just curious about the weavers from Panama.
So there's a mandatory education. The government has built a classroom out in the remote villages, which is kind of bizarre because they're in the middle of nowhere, and they have classrooms with computers stacked up against the wall because there's obviously no electricity. It's a really kind of bizarre situation, but the kids do have mandatory education to the 6th grade. So they are provided education. They wear school uniforms. It's very kind of typical. So they all have school through the 6th grade. If there's a family of weavers, which has happened, that we've got maybe somebody who's an amazing master weaver who creates very large, very expensive pieces. Sometimes there's a handful of them that have bought additional properties on this newer village on the outskirts of Panama City, just to be able to move their family there so their kids can get continued education for free. But they can't continue their education if they stay in the village. They'll have to leave. And so we've I wouldn't say lost, because people they have their own path, and that's the path they've chose. But we have had weavers that we work with for a while, and then they decide to continue their education, and they were quite skilled, but they maybe moved in with a relative that lived on the outskirts of the city to go to college for free, and they'll just do different things. So there's a basic up to 6th grade, and then what they do after that's really up to the amount of money they can make if they want to do that.
I want to jump over to Michelle. Sorry, Michelle, I probably could have directed a couple of these other questions to you as well. But there was a question about how they dye the materials in Guatemala. And I suppose that would apply to whether or not they dye the pine needles or they only dye the raffia as well.
I'm going to turn that one over to Anne because
Okay. You need, like, when you look at the materials themselves, that you have 3 values, right, in the raw materials themselves: the pine needles, the bahon being the middle tone, and then the raffia being the lightest tone. So there's a lot of variation there. But this is Guatemala, and the women love color. And so we're using synthetic direct dyes. We've done a lot of experimenting with natural dyes. The bahon won't take it, the pine needles won't take it. And the raffia is rather inconsistent, and the women are not happy with that. But Michelle and I have been talking about it this last week, and I'm beginning to think we're going to go back to the drawing board on this. And I think it will be the raffia, but it's really challenging. So right now we're using synthetic dyes, and the women love working with color, and how that's the way it is.
We're wondering, is the raffia readily available in Guatemala, or do you have to ship it in for the weavers? Because most raffia, of course, in the whole world, almost all the raffia comes from Madagascar.
That's where we ship it from. So we bring it through China to LA, to Miami, to Guatemala. And so we recently brought a ton in, and we have to plan well ahead. So I'm looking now at how much we have. I like to have at least 6 months in country all the time, so we don't have to panic.
And Anne, if you could, this is kind of a question for everybody, and this might be our last question here, but we'll start with Anne since you're here on screen. Is there a program to have the weavers learn sort of the managerial, marketing, selling aspects of the business? Is there any kind of programs you do to involve them in those processes?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are business women. And so, and we operate in a way that adheres to all of the laws in Guatemala. So everybody has to submit facturas, which are invoices, and so all of the women know how to do that. We recently had a big challenge when Guatemala just required that all facturas can't be done by hand, but have to be done electronically. So for women who can't read or write, and who have never used a computer, it's challenging. And I heard a lot about it a few weeks ago. But they can do it. They're going to do it, and we'll support them in doing that. And we also do, we have workshops on leadership development, et cetera. So the women who are the leaders of the groups, leadership rotates among the women. They have more of a chance to work alongside our field representatives and do all the paperwork. But they have to do the paperwork because they do all the accounting, and they pick up the money for their group and then distribute it. And there has to be a very transparent paper trail.
Karen, same question.
Well, I suppose the difference might be is that we're a Namibian social enterprise. So, I mean, the weavers live in very remote settlements. So, and they're not doing this full time. They are mostly agriculturalists. So they all understand the business process. We have buyers that we've been working with for 30 years. So they come to Windhoek, and we're quite transparent about our processes. They understand the supply chain, but they don't have access to markets. They're far away from markets, far away from tourists. So by and large, it's centered around OMBA. And also I think Namibia is quite different to other countries because our population is so small, and the transactional costs are quite high. You need volume to make these enterprises sustainable. So that's why we don't just have weavers, we have other products as well. But they do, as I say, understand. They all have bank accounts and write invoices, and there's been substantial training in the whole supply chain and the process.
Thank you. So we'll direct the same question there to Jennifer.
So the weavers that we primarily work with, we don't work with a program for marketing and selling themselves, although, so that's something that we kind of offer as our bit, although we do have some weavers. So I guess to that extent, they are very impressive in how they self-motivate to even represent each other. As we go to visit, we will meet with a weaver as she is presenting us with her pieces. She'll also have a smattering of other people's pieces that she'll be like, these are mine and these are somebody else's, and they just kind of come as a package. So they kind of represent each other. There have been some weavers that have started little shops, little artiserias, to represent their fellow weavers in Panama. And the way that would work, and they all do this themselves. We don't do that. But the way that would work is we really like to collect the high-end pieces, and the high-end pieces are not the pieces you're going to find in the tourist market. So a lot of the weavers who make these very long-term that get to be very expensive pieces, there's not a person just walking by them that's ready for a $5,000 basket. That just doesn't happen. They can make much less expensive pieces and have their own booth, and that's all their thing. But the one weaver that started a booth in an artisteria and represented a bunch of other people's work, at the same time she was representing their work, she was in the back weaving these exquisite pieces for us that she would never sell in her booth because people would not be willing to spend that kind of money in a walk-by booth. But she would be making it because she knows that we would, because we target that niche. So they kind of represent themselves, and we don't discourage. Of course, they could do whatever they want. They're very creative and impressive, but that's not something we work with them on.
Well, thank you all very much for attending the panel, to all the attendees, and thank you for the panelists for making these presentations and answering all the questions. And thank you for Kelsey for giving us an extra 10 minutes. So we didn't get to every question answered, but almost. So that was really well done. And I just wanted to encourage everyone to, support basket weavers. The way you support basket weavers is by buying baskets. So please visit all these websites. All of them sell. Even Karen in Namibia, her team will ship them directly to you from Namibia. So please support basket weavers any way you can. And we have one comment here that's from someone who studies and collects textiles. So she almost skipped this one on basketry, but she found it was such an amazing panel. So thank you all for your comments in the chat as well.
Thank you very much, Cal. Thank you.
Thank you, Kale, and thank you, Karen, Jennifer, Michelle, and Anne. Thank you all for joining us and sharing this beautiful basketry work with us today. It's been wonderful to have you on.